cool. Holy Family Elementary School. I was sharing with them earlier that I have memories of I have memories of my mom working, who's she's kind of doing stuff in the background. She's here too on her device, but memories of my mom like working graveyard shift. She worked all the way in Hancock Park, and then she would come home from work and then pick me up, and then we drive down Colorado Boulevard and then stop at Burger King where we'd get a bacon, egg, and cheese croissant for lunch. Either that or the Burger King staff was nice enough to make a cheeseburger even though it was still breakfast hours. And then we'd head over to my elementary school. And I've been reflecting a lot about how me as a writer and author, I think about, most people think about, okay, you went to college, you went to graduate school for that. But I've been thinking a lot about how my early years unintentionally have played a role in how I became a writer. When I was there at Holy Family, I didn't think much of it, but a lot of my teachers happened to be women of color, Latinx women, Filipinx or Filipina women, mostly immigrant women, who would incorporate these assignments, which I now in retrospect see as very important. They would, everything from like a family tree project to asking us to write about our traditions, or having days where we would bring in our cultural food. And I remember my dad, who's also on this call, who's, you can see is just his head's cut up here. My dad would help me with these assignments, and he would be the one to answer for me, like what's our Filipino traditions? And he'd be like Noche Buena, or we would do Simbang Gabi, or any of this other stuff. And it just, in a very subtle way, became very important for me to write down what Filipino stories were. At first, obviously, just for a homework assignment, but over time, before I knew it, I was doing this a lot. And I guess I think about that because having gone to that elementary school, which was predominantly Filipino students, Filipinx students, and Latinx students, to my high school, which was predominantly white, I didn't realize how important it was to have that touchstone of getting to write about what was considered my history, considering we weren't going to have a lot of that in our textbook or curriculum. So yeah, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to the students, the incredible students who are curating this really amazing Zoom hangout for all of us, Professor Ramos, and my parents, because I mean, come on, they were my very first teachers. And my book, I have a copy right here. I like to always front load by thanking them. But yeah, I mean, even when I was writing this long book that took me hella long, I just want to make sure I shout out my mom and dad, just because, hey, they're waving. Mom, wave. There you go. Okay. Just because, I mean, that stuff matters. There's this famous Filipino saying in Tagalog, which I cannot for the life of me pronounce, but it's something to the effect of, if you don't know where you came from, you're not going to know where you're going. So anyway, it's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We're part of the, whether we have our family roots in Asia or not, this is something that we're all celebrating right now. I think that the celebration of Asian American history, Pacific Islander history, and communities is so important, especially because for a lot of young folks today who haven't necessarily been witness to the history of Asian Americans in this country, whether through your textbooks or your own experience, we're seeing that, the sense of belonging that Asian American Pacific Islanders have in this country, whether they came yesterday or whether they came 5 generations ago, is being called into question, right? I mean, we've seen stories of Asian Americans just doing everyday things like taking out the garbage, going to the grocery store, and, you know, so-called Americans or patriotic, whatever you want to call them, are harassing them, bullying them, physically assaulting them, and all of those things are incredibly scary, but incredibly important to not just let fly under the radar and fly by. Those are moments in which Asian Americans' sense of identity, sense of belonging is questioned. And one of the best things that I found for all the moments that I felt like I didn't belong was to actually put pen to paper and write. So to bring it back to today's topic, and I'm gonna share, just screen share something real quick. To bring it back to today's topic, can you see this PowerPoint? Yes? Okay, cool. I'm gonna blow it up. All right. All right, so anyway, I just wanted to say it's just so folks can let me. It's showing up on the screen, full screen. Yes, can you nod if it is? No. Yes, Kevin, can you nod if the PowerPoint's?
I see it as the presenter's view. So you have the
Okay. Let me do the other one. Presenters. Let's do desktop too. Okay. How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if the built-in subtitles would work, but again, we have our wonderful interpreter here, so I'm glad that we have that going on. But you know, I can't pinpoint the day when I felt like I wanted to become a writer. You know, I know that sometimes you'll meet people that said, I've always wanted to be a writer, but as a Filipino, as a son of immigrants, that was just never something that ever came up. I mean, there was all sorts of careers that came up, from doctor to lawyer, to nurse, of course, right? But when it comes to being a writer, that was probably, I mean, I don't know anywhere in which that ever came up. And to be honest, like the idea that I'm known in the public sphere as a writer is still something that's very, sometimes I have days when it's hard for me to even believe. But I share that because I know that some of you are enjoy writing and creating, whether your storytelling happens through pen and paper, I was gonna say typewriter, but like through like words or art form or dance or film. I realized that storytelling was the biggest, most important, impactful tool that I had at my disposal to make me feel like I belonged here. And then when I started to have some sort of momentum with storytelling, whether it be giving talks like this or whether it be writing books or essays, I started to realize how writing in and of itself could actually have that effect for other people beyond myself. At first, I just wrote because I felt like I didn't belong, but I never realized that writing could actually help other people feel like they belong too. And so, you know, so I wanted to just kind of talk freely about how this book started, which you can see on the screen. And then I wanted to, of course, open it up to more of a dialogue because we only do have an hour. I mean, we could spend hours here. I'd be happy to, but I know that people have things to do. But the story of how I got writing this book started for me in college. So, as I said, I'm from Eagle Rock. I went to school with a lot of Filipino, Latinx folks, a lot of brown folks. That was what I was used to for the first 9 years of my life. And then I went to a high school that was in LA that was less diverse than the school that I went to. There was 50% of the student body was white, not only white, but also affluent. And so I think that was the first place where I was like, oh man, like being Filipino or Mexican isn't the only thing there is in the world. And then I went to college and whew, I was at Stanford, and there it was just like, I went from growing up in Eagle Rock where it's 20% of the residents are Filipino to 20 Filipino American students in the entire freshman class. So that's just bananas. I know that you go to Glendale Community College and there's like probably Filipinos everywhere, or you go to the Glendale Galleria, or no one goes to the Galleria anymore, the Americana, and you see there's Filipinos everywhere. That was not the case when I was in college, and that really affected me. And so the reason that affected me is because, you know, when you're in a new place, the first thing you want to do is connect with other people and make friends. What I found was that in talking about my life, growing up in a Filipino household, or, you know, having visited the Philippines a lot when I was growing up, it's really interesting when you're in a circle of new people and you hear people talking about themselves and their, you know, their backgrounds and their lives. And, you know, I had classmates that would like, they had gone to Europe or studied in Europe, or I had classmates that like, you know, were friends with Natalie Portman. Really, like my best friend's Natalie Portman, or I ride horses. You know, like these were the sort of stories that in college people were like oohing and awing about. And then when it came time to share about me, I was like, I don't really know how my, you know, experience like visiting the Philippines every other year, or growing up in a household where, you know, it's not just me, my mom and dad, but also my grandma, my Lola, we have cousins there. I don't like all of our, you know, Filipino jokes and foods I didn't get the sense that they would resonate with them. So being in the minority, like literally the minority, had not the best effect on my academic self-esteem. And so I didn't like it. My first year at Stanford, I didn't like it. I still remember there was a day later on in the academic year where me and I don't know if my mom and dad will remember this, but we were at Tony Roma's in Glendale, actually, on Maryland. I remember this specifically. And I told them, I don't like Stanford. I want to go to Berkeley, because I had visited Berkeley. My cousin went to Berkeley. There was a million Filipinos at Berkeley. I just wanted to go to Berkeley. And so, I mean, I don't know how that conversation unfolded, but at some point I was like determined to fill out a transfer application to go to Berkeley. I even downloaded it off the internet or whatever you did back in the early 2000s. And I was like looking into it seriously. And then I happened to run into a Filipino-American graduate student at my university by the name of Don Mabalan, who sadly passed away last summer. And not last, 2 summers ago. And I had a class with this professor. She was still in graduate school getting her PhD, but I had a class, and her class was the very first time where I was sitting in a classroom and the stuff that we were reading, the things we were getting lectured about, our actual like homework assignments were all about Filipino American experiences. And I just thought, I've never experienced this before. This is so mind-blowing. It was eye-opening. I hadn't even realized that the 13 plus years of schooling in which we didn't do much social studies work on Filipinos made me think that reading and writing and studying Filipinos didn't matter. And so with Dawn's class, it's sort of, everything sort of gelled in that moment when I had that class with her. And she was actually the one who convinced me to not transfer to a different school, because she said, you know, it's not a lot of Filipinos that get the opportunity to go to this place, so you probably want to stay. And when she said that, I was like, cool. But it was from her that I actually first considered the idea of getting a PhD. Actually, in the very first day of class, she said, if you learn nothing, I was like 18-year-old kid in college. She's like, if you learn nothing else from my class, go get your PhD. And at 18, I was like, I have no idea what that means. I literally have no idea what that means, but hey, it stuck. So through her class, I just got really excited about, I wanted to take other classes where I could study Filipinos, even if like she was the only time that I had a class where it was Filipino American studies specifically. But I took like an African American psychology class, and I said, hey, can I write my final paper on Filipino psychology? And the professor was like, yeah, sure. I took a Chicano studies class, and the professor was like, he happened to be half Filipino, half Mexican, or I'm sorry, he's multiracial, and he's biracial. He's Filipino and Mexican. I want to say, I'm trying to stop saying like half, because even if you only have one parent that's Filipino, you're all Filipino, and et cetera, et cetera. So he was biracial. He was Filipino and Mexican American, and he let me do my final project on the importance of the Virgin Mary in Filipino immigrant communities. So slowly but surely, I was accumulating academic experiences where I got to just like work out my thoughts on Filipino American identity. And sooner or later, I found myself majoring in ethnic studies. I took classes in everywhere, history. I took classes in sociology. I took classes in Chicano Latino studies. I took classes, which would be Latinx studies now. I took African American studies classes. I took literature classes. Any chance I got to read and write about Filipino Americans, even if it wasn't in the curriculum officially, I would try to do it. I just got obsessed with writing. And what I noticed is that the more I wrote, even if it was just for a school assignment, the more I wrote about Filipinx American experiences, every time I wrote something, I learned something new about myself. It may have been a factoid about Filipino American history, like the farm workers movement, or the foods they ate, or the gender dynamics in history. It may be like an original insight that I had about how Filipino identity, you can't just look at Filipinos as just Asian, because, I mean, the way sociologists think about race, it's more than just geography. It's everything from like your last names to food to your cultural norms, etc. And so in a lot of ways, if you like remove the fact that the Philippines is technically in Asia, a lot of stuff overlaps with Latinx community. So what do we do about that? And so that was actually the idea that got one of my professors to be like, have you ever considered writing about this or writing a book on this? Because I haven't really seen it out in the world. And I'm like, that's impossible because people have written about everything. He's like, no, I really think you got something going here. Plus, like, you grew up in Eagle Rock, which is Latinx, and well, he didn't say Latinx because we didn't say that back in 2001, but Latino and Filipino. He was like, I actually think Filipinos are kind of like Pacific Latinos, like merging Pacific Islander identity and Latino identity. So I just got really obsessed with that, and that's all I wanted to do with my free time. And luckily, in ethnic studies, it was a curriculum where it was totally acceptable to pursue an original idea to the max. So yeah, I decided to go get my PhD because I really wanted to write books. I mean, I didn't realize there's other ways to write books, and you don't have to spend 7 years getting a PhD to write books. You could go to like an MFA program or for 2 years, or become a journalist. But whatever, like someone told me you got to go get a PhD, so that's what I ended up doing. And what's funny is that I just kept writing. I went to my bookshelf because I have all of my college essays that I ever wrote about Filipino. Here, let me, like, my rantings are my final papers, term papers, if you call them, for Filipino, on Filipino American identity. Let me find one. This is like, let's see. Yeah, so like, here, I'll show you a couple of them. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, so let's show you this one. So, every chance I got, I would write about Filipino stuff. So this is for a class I took in back in, what year does it say there? 2003 with Professor Anthony Antonio. But yeah, I would be all kinds of like getting my anger out on paper. Filipino American racialization within academia. Ironically, that's what I'm talking about today. What year is it? 2020? 17 years later, I'm still talking about the same thing. Um, so yeah, it's you do this for a long time and it brings you joy in and of itself. And then over time, you just start to connect with other people who are doing it in their own way, whether it's in sociology or history. For me, I went into a sociology program and I just started to do research. For me, my book involved interviewing people. So I would find random Filipino Americans and I would interview them for maybe an hour or two and just ask them like what's it like growing up in LA, like what do you think about identity, which groups in school do you relate to most, which who are the type of people that you've dated in your life. And I would just ask these questions that would get us flowing in a convo. And the more I collected stories, the more I realized, I feel like there's a book that could emerge from all of this. And so yeah, that's the origins of my writing career, is that it started from feeling marginalized or feeling invisible. And I felt like I wanted to use writing to, at first, again, make myself feel visible and and then in the process, I realized that, people are actually reading this thing or they're hearing about it. And it's been really cool because I'll get random emails from students in high school, students in all over different colleges, all over the world, that are just excited that someone, like, to be able to read the word Filipino in like a published book just means so much. And I never realized how much stuff that I wrote could affect people in a good way. Of course, there's people that are like, I totally disagree with what you wrote. And that's great too, because in some ways, I don't want to be the person that wrote the book on Filipinos, because there's how many of us in the world? Like hundreds of millions of us. There's 100 million stories out there to tell. In the United States, there's close to 4 million. There's 4 million Filipino American stories to tell. By no means do I want me to be the one person telling this story. So yeah, my hope is that the book emboldens other people to like write whatever version of your story there is, whether it's being someone who's undocumented or queer or trans or Muslim or someone that grew up in a predominantly white area or predominantly African American area or grew up in like Arkansas. I've actually met Filipinos from Arkansas that are like, hey, I feel like there's a story I want to tell and I'm inspired, and that makes me feel so good. There's so many of our stories to tell, and I feel like, especially now, given everything we see on TV is so toxic and terrible and demeaning of not just us, but of other Black, Indigenous people of color, we got to take our stories in our own hands and we got to tell them in whatever arena we got, whether it's Twitter or books or documentary, art, etc., etc. So I've been talking a lot. I tend to not want to talk a lot, and I want to pause to see if there's any questions before. And of course, I'm happy to share findings from the book, but let me pause because I've been on it, but to see if there's any questions from anyone in the room.
Hi, everyone. Again, feel free to put down any questions you guys have in the chat. We will also be having a quick Q&A towards the end of your presentation, if you're okay with that.
Ooh. Oh, cool. Okay.
Do you have access to the chat, or would you like me to read you the question?
I do. I want to make sure I don't miss anybody. So, yeah. Oh, so Professor Ramos still has notes and papers from GCC. Oh, and Cal Poly. You went to Cal Poly?
Cal Poly, yeah.
Right over here, like literally here?
Yep, but my undergrad was in philosophy, so I forgot which building that was.
You know what? I've been there for 10 years and I don't know where that is.
That was a long time ago, so I'm aging
You know,
myself.
one of my favorite writers, his name's Hanif Abdul Rakib. He is a poet and he wrote a journalist and writer. He was just talking about how most of his writing right now is unearthing stuff that he's recycling from like long time ago.
Very cool.
That would be so cool to. There's something there. I feel like even in these essays, there's like I've only scratched the surface of what I wrote about in undergrad, and there's so much there that could happen. Sandy, you have them in your filing cabinet. That's cool. You should like tweet or share some insights on the Twitter or the Facebook or wherever, because it's you never know who's out there that shares your story, or who saved the papers as well. Yeah. Oh, Professor Somo. I'm sorry. Let me get that right. Aditi, hi, it's nice to see you. How did you promote your books? I will definitely answer that question. Let me touch that question. How did you promote your books? Okay, so there's this stereotype about academics, and let me stop sharing for a second. There's a stereotype about academics that, and it's true, academics sometimes write in ways that are very inaccessible or very theoretical. And I think that it's okay to do that sometimes because, you know, you learn all this complex theory, kind of like, you know, a medical doctor would, and you can use that jargon to advance understandings about racial inequality, gender inequality, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I wanted to, I know how to write like that. I enjoy writing like that. But for the book's purposes, I wanted to write a book that, I kid you not, like it's a book that you could read like, you know, when you go to the Cheesecake Factory and it's like a 40-minute wait. Thumbs up, give me a thumbs up if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, or you're, I don't know, waiting for the bus or the metro. I wanted to write a book that you could read in those contexts where you could take a sip and just like read at any point. Sometimes with books, you have to really sit down and get into them, but I wanted to have something that was very digestible. I wanted to have something that was very accessible. I remember sharing one of my essays that I wrote that I was very proud of during my master's program, and I showed it to my mom and dad, and I wanted them to read it, and they were like, I don't know what this means. So I was like, I don't really like that feeling too much. And so I made a switch from writing in very, very heavy academic jargon, which I still think is important. I'm not knocking it, but I started to want to write more in a storytelling voice. And so in terms of promoting the book, that's not a direct answer to that. But for me, promoting the book had to entail knowing who my audience was even before I like wrote something down. So that's number one. Cuentohan, I love it. Storytelling, absolutely. So that is a tradition that is embedded in indigenous communities, in our own communities. If you could tell a good story, you can change people's hearts and minds. So I wanted to, that was my first step of promoting the book even before there was a book. Now, when the book came out, I'll be real. I didn't know how to promote a book. I thought that your publisher does that for you. But fortunately, when I shared about the book on Facebook, an old classmate of mine from Holy Family Elementary School by the name of Joyce Aguirre. She was actually the daughter of one of my 7th grade teacher. She reached out and said, hey, I'm really excited about your book. Let's go grab happy hour. So, and just talk about it. I was like, sure, why not? I had spent like 10 years writing this thing or whatever. I was like happy to not be just like cooped up in an office writing. So we go to Burbank somewhere. What's that place called? I don't know. I forget the place. But we go to Burbank for some happy hour. I remember we were eating oysters of all, like, because oysters are like, I never tried oysters, but she's like, they have the best oysters. Morton's. We were at Morton's in Burbank. And she said, I think that you should set up a Facebook page for your group, I mean your book. And I said, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be like that annoying person on Facebook who's very self-promoting and is just talking about themselves, blah 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 blah. The type we're talking about that like posts everything on Facebook or Instagram, and you're just like, oh my god, I don't care about the cheese sandwich you're eating on a Tuesday, right? I didn't want to be that. But she said it's really important you do that because it's kind of, just think of it as like a bulletin board where you're posting announcements if you have a talk or you have some sort of event happening. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So I set up a Facebook page, 0 followers, maybe like my friends or whatever. And I started posting about the book release or if I had a talk happening. And then I was like, I don't like just talking about just me. So I started posting about other related Filipinx American events. So if someone was opening a restaurant, I would post about that. If I saw an article in the LA Times about bulk buying boxes, I would post that. If I liked some random Filipino singer on some reality show on American Idol or America's Got Talent, I would post about that. I just wanted to use it half to talk about the book and then half to promote other Filipino American folks. And lo and behold, because most people don't have access to content that's Filipino American specific, the page ended up growing and growing and growing. So right now it's like about 9,000 people. And so that's bananas to me. But what ended up happening was that through posting about it, I learned 2 things. Number one, that idea of not wanting to promote ourselves, I see the value of humility and being humble and not arrogant, or as Filipinos would say, mayabang. It's very important. It's also important for us to value and celebrate ourselves and know when we did something that was really dope, right? I see Ryan Huerto. I see you in the chat, or I see you here. Like this Filipino dude is he's a doctor, like a real one. Like he's a physician. He has an MD, and you have an MPH as well. Like right? I think so. Like yes. Hi. I've never met Ryan Huerto. I've only met him on Twitter, but I know he's Ryan Huerto, MD, MPH, who talks about Filipino health issues, racial inequality in health. And I think that's amazing because I'm not an expert on that stuff, but through social media, I've gotten the chance to interact with people that are Filipino, Filipinx, and experts in whatever fashion they are, It might not even be something related to academics. If someone is an expert on what it's like to be a domestic worker, to be undocumented, I've had the chance to use that Facebook page to connect with folks who have other stories as well. I've met someone who is a Filipina undocumented person that went to occupational therapy school. So even though, it's not related to what I talked about in the book, promoting the book gave me the chance to connect with her. I met someone that helped produce a radio show on NPR called Morning Edition. I made friends with a Filipino American from the South. She's from Kentucky, hardcore University of Kentucky, whatever their sports team is. She's like all about it. She's adopted, and she grew up in the South. She had Filipino cousins because they adopted other Filipinos in that larger family. But she has a very different experience of mine, and I've learned about the adoptee experience because I promoted my book, right? And so I like to think about promoting your book not as literal promoting your book, but as an opportunity for you to connect with people like that you would never imagine connecting with. So, you're welcome, Dr. Huerto. Yeah, it's just because I think that let me just give you an example. If I was sitting in this call as a student at Glendale Community College and I saw that, oh wow, there's a Filipino professor who wrote a physical book that's giving the talk, and in the same room there's like a Filipino who's like a physician, all of a sudden, without even realizing it, those two things are going to become much more possible in ways that they weren't when you didn't know that that existed as an option for people. So a long-winded way to answer your question about promotion. I think it's absolutely cool to promote on all the socials, but don't ever think about it from the perspective of ego, because I think that can get dangerous, and it gets really intoxicating to get a lot of attention. Think of it as an opportunity for you to kind of, when you put yourself out there, it's just a chance to curate a community and meet people you would never probably meet just walking down the street or going to well, not now, but like, in everyday life. So let's get another question. Let's see.
Do you mind if I ask one, Dr. Ocampo? We have a list that we've compiled. Let's see. As an Asian American, we're typically pitted to enter the sciences. After completing your degrees in sociology, what inspired you to pursue the social sciences, and what would you say to an Asian Pacific American student who wants to focus on a non-science career or degree?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. First of all, shout out to my STEM people. Whew. Kudos. That's hard. It's like lab at 8 a.m, and it's just real hard. I think that sometimes the reason parents push science is with the best of intentions. In their view, the belief is that if I push them to science, then they will enter a career in which they can have economic stability. Because traditionally, that's what STEM has been. It's been a lot of economic stability. I also think that there's a lot of different careers outside of the sciences, and careers where you can achieve the same sort of like economic stability, if not more, because your heart is in that field, right? When I'm reading and writing and working, teaching, doing this stuff does not feel like work. It feels like we're just kicking it and hanging out, and I'm just being myself. But the career that I chose has allowed me to have something where my 40 plus hours a week is spent doing things where it feels like I'm just being myself and kicking it with other people and connecting, right? And I think that sometimes careers in the non-science fields are just not legible in the same way that science is. You're science, oh, you're an engineer, you're a scientist, like you're a doctor, right? Those things they land in the imaginations of parents, of immigrant parents. And in a lot of ways, if your parents are immigrants, I'm not assuming that they are, but if parents are immigrants, they sacrifice so much to come to this country. They're trying to really push the thing that's going to be most stable so that their kids won't have to endure the same hardships as they did, right? And so what I think could be beneficial for someone that is wanting to pursue a different field that's not science is, number one, your parents will still love you if you do not do science. They will still be there for you, right? I think that sometimes we get in our heads that, oh, my parents won't love me the same way or value me if I don't do science. And that's not true, right? It's just a new reality they got to get used to. Number two, I do think that it is to your benefit, both for your relation, for explaining to your parents, as well as for yourself, to do a lot of due diligence, to do the research of how you can create a career even in a field that is unfamiliar to your family. Let me just use the example of dance, right? I know that there's a lot of Filipinos I've met that are like, I want to be a dancer or I want to be an artist, right? And parents might think that's a very, very difficult thing to build a career on. And that's very true. You break one ankle, it's over, right? But if you're a dancer, what that means is you're connected to a dance community, which means that you could be someone that uses those networks that you have in dance to community organize, to do art therapy, to do social activism. You could even become a university professor that studies dance and dance theory. I have a friend, Lorenzo Perillo. He is a dancer. He was like hardcore into doing Filipino culture night in his college. Now he's a dance professor. So half of his classes he's teaching actual dance, hip hop. The other half he's teaching about the importance of dance in the activism of Filipino communities around the world. And he's also writing a book about that. So I think it's to your benefit to if you want to do something that you think your parents aren't going to get, to do the background research to prove to them and, to be honest, to yourself that there is a viable pathway that you can pursue, even if the original version of it doesn't play out. I have friends that, for example, they wanted to become doctors, right? But med school, for whatever reason, didn't play out. So they became people that worked in like helping low-income communities obtain health insurance, right? That's helping people on the medical front, but it's not exactly the same thing, but it's still the same sphere. So I have a couple of questions. I can read these out. Hi, how can students find and reach out to potential mentors for writing, academia, research? Can us students cold email people whether we're affiliated with the same university or not? You know, I think that's one where I would encourage students to. Okay, I have a two-way response to this. Sometimes I'll get cold emails from Filipinos, and they'll be like, and I understand it. They're like, I want to pursue, I want to be a professor or something, but they haven't done any research on what that means, or they haven't, like, I'll get, sometimes people will reach out to me and say like, can you help me with this? And I'm sometimes, depending on my mood or like how busy I am, I'll say yes. I'll usually say yes, but there's part of me that's like, I wrote a whole book about what you're asking, and I've done a million interviews and podcasts about what you're asking. Wouldn't you rather do the research on that stuff so that when I do agree to talk to you, we can talk about something that's like more advanced? So my sentiment is, if you want to reach out to writers and academics and research, I think cold emailing them is totally okay. I think it's also going to be beneficial for you to have read something that they've read before, or to have watched an interview, so that you can have something to go on. By no means am I comparing myself to like someone famous or anything, but imagine if your job as a journalist was to like interview someone that was famous, that doesn't have as much time. Try to make it worth it. And so that's what I would say about cold emailing. And then, with cold emailing, I think that you're going to get a mix of responses. Some people won't respond. A lot of people will. I think Filipino academics and writers are wonderful at responding. Follow them on Twitter so that you kind of get to know them. That's something I learned from one of my writer friends, Meredith Talusan, who just released this book, Ferris, trans Filipino immigrant writer who is so wonderful. Get her book. It comes out this month, at the end of the month, May 27th. But she taught me that it's important to, it's really easy to connect with Filipinos on social media. If they're not on social media, emailing them is good, and just sharing about yourself. And it is not to say that I think people are going to be mean, or I'm mean, because I'm not, but I want it to be worth your while. When I was in my before I even wrote a book, I would sometimes write famous writers that whose books would be like at like when I say famous writer, their books are like at the airport or when you walk into Barnes and Nobles, it's at the front, like at the front. And I would write them just to say, I just read your book and I really appreciate so much that you wrote this book and it's helped me think about X, Y, and Z different. Because that actually provided me with so much joy to just let them know that their book affected me. And then shockingly, half of them wrote back. I'm talking people that are like New York Times best-selling authors, people that you would see on MSNBC or CNN as like interviewees. And I was shocked. And even if they wrote back with like a one-line email saying like, keep going, I have those emails saved. And those are the things that power me through the tough times that inevitably come with pursuing a life that's creative. So that's my approach to that. But let me get to the next question. Yeah, but yes, cold email. If you have any doubt, email me and we can work through that. So talented artist, painter, but discouraged to pursue art and go to the sciences instead. Oh, that's such a like left turn. I think that again, if you can figure out a way to like argue your case, it's good for you too. Have you ever wanted to give up writing for a moment? Yeah, all the time. Writing is tough, and it's every time you try to learn a new style of writing, it's tough. And so I feel like academic writing, I figured out the formula, and then I wanted to write more creatively, and I was like, oh shoot, it's a totally different genre of writing I gotta learn. I think that some styles of writing are more difficult than others. If you want to be a screenwriter for television, that's a very tough industry, but there's a lot of places in which, again, you could do the same thing of cultivating networks, you could take classes. If you really want to have a place where you have structured support for writing, I highly recommend UCLA. The extension program at UCLA is excellent. You could, without having to like go to major in creative writing, you could take a class that could do wonders for you. You could take a class with this website called Catapult, which has online classes that teaches people how to write, even if you're in the beginning stages. I just read this amazing book by Stephen King called On Writing. It's amazing. It's the best book I've ever read on writing. If you wanna read about writing, like Stephen King, that book on writing is so good when it comes, and it even gives you little things on how to get started writing, how to deal with the emotional aspect of feeling like writing's hard. Go for that book. I would spend the $12 to go get that book for sure. I read it in like 2 weeks, I just finished it yesterday. I wish I read it 20 years ago. So, but yeah, I feel like quitting all the time. And then, I sometimes joke that writing books is like the best thing in my life and the worst thing in my life. And it's true. Like when it's good, it's great. When it's not, oof, I am like, why did I even start in the first place? So let's see. Thank you, Aditi. Appreciate that. Oh, I love this. People are sending me private messages. Yes, amazing. Reflected in your experience at Stanford, PWI, what sorts of support can non-Filipinx colleagues and professors do? Oh, wonderful question. To nourish Filipinx students. I think that as Filipinos, I don't know, maybe it's the colonialism thing. We've been so conditioned to be like, we shouldn't be censored. And one thing that's really helped me is when folks give me airtime, hey, like if we're close enough, they can be like, what's your Filipino take on this? Assuming that it's not some like ignorant person that's just exoticizing my opinion, I'm like really excited to have the floor. I think as a Filipino American, even someone that's had the chance to study this stuff in a formal setting, I went through many years where I felt like talking about Filipinos and taking up airtime was considered a faux pas or in bad taste. And so when I get the sense that someone has given me the floor, relinquished the floor, and truly is hoping to listen intently about the incredible things that you can learn about the world from the Filipino experience, Filipinx experience. That's really cool when people do that. I really, really appreciate that. Because I think that, again, my default sometimes is, oh, I don't want to like inject Filipino stuff. We take up too much. I don't want to take up too much room. I want to be not seen as mayabang. But you know what? Like, what I like to tell Filipinos is, my Filipino students, it's like, yo, you got to take up space in your work conversations, in your school, classroom convos. You got to carve out some space so that some future Filipino American, Filipinx American that comes after you isn't going to have as hard a time injecting their opinion. Because the truth of the matter is, I do find some spaces where people are like, oh, I met this other Filipino who I thought was really cool, so they've opened the door for me to then, you know, drop into it. What I really can't stand is when I'm in a space and I constantly have to explain the Filipino 101 basics. That's annoying because I really just want to hit the ground running about cool things. But hey, if you have to use ube ice cream as your point of entry to talk about, you know, Rodrigo Duterte, then do it. That may be the case. So, Scott, maybe you could ask people about ube ice cream and see what happens, how that conversation unfolds into more deeper stuff. So, I love that. Thank you for being an ally and accomplice and advocate. So,
just letting everybody know, and Dr. Ocampo, we have a couple of minutes. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So just
yeah. And if you need me to stay longer, I'm happy to. Just, you know, it's all good. This is rare, you know, so I don't get the chance to do this. So this is super fun for me. Okay. Am I missing? Can hosts, can you tell me if I'm missing a question? Let's see. Oh, cool. I love people sharing their stories on the site here. First gen Filipinx Community College transfer student. Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Aditi. I really appreciate that. We've met before. Where are you? Where are you? Can you wave it?
May I say something really quick about Professor Aditi Sapra? She was the one who actually suggested you as a speaker.
Oh.
So I just wanted to give a shout out to, she's a very dear friend of mine and colleague. So she and I will have a debrief after, but thank you, Aditi, for introducing us to Dr. Ocampo. I mean, I was familiar with your work, but she was the one who really pushed for you. She teaches sociology.
Cool. And we met randomly at a conference. We were just like talking about your cool research. You can't unmute yourself, but that's okay. Just, yeah. I specifically remember meeting you. We were at a PSA, and I don't know, maybe the panel just let up or it ended, and we were standing in the middle of the rows or something. But yeah, I remember talking about you and your research, and you have a Cal State LA connection, right? Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I've been unmuted now. There we go.
Yes, I remember that we talked about Cal State LA, and I forget, but I know that you were doing research on, oh my gosh, I don't remember it offhand, but we've corresponded a lot.
Yeah, and it was mostly a research about doctor-patient relationships.
Oh yes, that's right.
Right, and how Asian Americans and first generation Asian Americans respond to doctors.
Oof, that's a research topic if there ever was one.
Yeah, but I don't want to take over with that, so I thought I'd give you a quick snippet. But it was wonderful. It's wonderful to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Cool. Any other questions?
So unfortunately, we are out of time,
Okay,
but
yes.
Thank you so much for your time and all your knowledge and all your information. We really, really appreciate you having here. One last time, I wanted to tell everyone that we are having a raffle. I linked the evaluation form in the chat for all GCC students that attended with their cameras on. So again, thank you so much to Dr. Ocampo, and Professor Ramos or Kevin has anything else to add, please feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to end the meeting.
We're good. Thank you everyone for being here today, and we look forward to connecting with those of you who were part of this presentation. So thank you, Anthony. We'll be in touch.
Of course. Bye.
Bye, everyone.